At DDI, we turn data-driven insights into dynamic leadership development, unlocking potential, sparking growth, driving performance. Because better leaders create a better future.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Solid Performer or Next VP. Most leadership development programs miss the difference. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. You can find today's slides in the additional resources section of your console. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive the link to watch on demand later today. The attendee chat feature is open and we encourage your comments and responses. And to submit a question for our presenter, please use the Ask a Question box. And now let's bring in today's presenter, DDI's Director of Consulting, Patrick Cannell. Patrick, we're excited to have you today.
Thank you, Kim. I'm excited to be here and welcome everybody. I see we've already got some folks from all over the country here that have joined. Chicago, Michigan, New Jersey, Milwaukee. All right. Welcome, everybody. Really glad that you're here. Glad to have your participation, your insights, your expertise as part of the discussion today. My name is Patrick Cannell. As Kim mentioned, I'm the Director of Consulting for North America. And for those of you who have maybe not partnered with DDI in the past, and also for those of you that have, you know that we are truly passionate about leadership and really being by your side as a customer for helping you to hire, promote, and develop the best leaders within your organization. We're also really passionate about something we call continuous leadership intelligence. And what is that? It's basically the powerful connection of integrating assessment insights, but then also powerful development experiences, and bringing that power to your organizations to really understand what is the capability and the insights around your leaders that are going to be most important, then customized also to the needs of your business as well. So, as I said, really excited to be here today. We're going to have places where we'll have you be able to weigh in via some polls and things like that. Also, feel free to leverage the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. And then we'll have time for a couple questions at the end too. So we'll be talking through those as we round out our session today. So with that in mind, we also wanted to start with hearing a bit from you. So we have a quick poll here. Thanks, Kim, for teasing that up. So you'll see the question on the screen. What we want to know from you is what's missing from your leadership programs today? And you can select one or multiple answers here, but would love to just have your candid feedback. What's, in your opinion, what do you think is missing from your leadership program today? And you can select one of those choices or more of those choices on the screen. I'm going to give a little time for folks to respond, and then we'll show you the results once we get a decent quorum here.
Patrick, I do see responses coming in, and so you'll make your selections on the screen and be sure to hit submit to register your responses. So see if we can get about half of our attendees responding here. Numbers are ticking up pretty quick.
And again, you don't have to choose just one. If there's a couple that are calling to you, that's fine as well. And we can just kind of get a sense of a lay of the land across everyone here.
Patrick, I do see some other responses are coming in the chat as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's great. If you've got something that you're not seeing on the screen, but you want to get into the conversation, absolutely.
All right. I'm going to advance for the results.
All right. Drum roll, please, right? Okay, so let's see what this breakdown looks like. So looks like the leader was the distinct programs for different levels of leaders. That's a perfect one to be our leader for the topic today, right? So yeah, that can be a real challenge to how to navigate that, and then where and how to invest in the right experiences and what tools and insights are going to be most applicable depending on the needs of your leaders at those different levels. So we're definitely going to unpack that too. Looks like close behind that was a clear connection to business impact and outcomes. Absolutely. So more and more what we're hearing from organizations is the pressure to be able to show, of course, ROI, that's always been there, but how the direct connection between these experiences themselves that leaders are going through, and then how is that really impacting outcomes that are important to the business. So how to tell that story in a compelling way. Really great. Okay, and it's a spattering across some of the others. I'm looking in chat too. It looks like I saw some pieces around accountability, like accountability for application and follow-up. I see Debbie has follow-up. See from Tanya, yeah, capacity, time to commit to growth. Absolutely, across all levels. But you think it's the higher you get in the pipeline, the more that becomes even a challenge, right? And I'll just point out more. This is from Maritza, experience in a formal training program to transition in higher level roles. Yeah, so how do you scale a really compelling experience, not just at the front line? How do you scale that to more senior and executive levels as well? Perfect. Thank you for weighing in there. That's a great backdrop for our discussion here today. And so I'm going to anchor us in a couple of concepts, and then we're going to dive into some actual examples as well that where customers that we have partnered with directly have really brought this to life at different levels in the organization. But what I'm sharing right now is probably a graphic that you have maybe seen before, or you maybe use something similar or a version of this in your organization, which is thinking about the different types of leaders in your organization, how that forms your overall leadership pipeline, and then of course, how you're anchoring the needs of leaders in the needs of the business. That's why you see business drivers really being spotlighted as the foundation there. It also raises a really, I think, important question that is always a bit of a balancing act. And that is, how do you develop both quality and quantity of leaders, right? So depth, but also scalability to meet both short-term needs of the business, but also long-term business goals. It's always a bit of a balancing act there, right? And a fun challenge to have to tackle for us in our roles. I had a customer, a CHRO for a large manufacturing organization that I was working directly with a couple of years ago. And she described this as the cake versus the cupcake dilemma, which I'm just going to leave that there and I'm going to come back to it. A little bit of a teaser, but that's how she was sort of thinking about it. We had some fun kind of thinking through it that lens for some of the challenges she was facing with her organization. So I'll come back to that as well. Before that, though, I want to get into a bit about what are some of the different challenges that are really most important as you think about leaders' needs by level, and then also the outcomes, the business outcomes too, that are also critical, and how that looks different as you sort of go up and down the pipeline here. So probably not a surprise for a lot of you where we see that those leaders that are making the jump from an emerging leader to a frontline leader, right? A lot of that focus is around how do they transition from getting results themselves to getting results through others. That tends to be one of the biggest learning curves from a transition standpoint. So a lot of focus and energy on that particular outcome or learning need. As leaders sort of mark to make the transition from a frontline to a mid-level role, get broader scope, broader teams, those core skills tend to be more cemented, and it's about how are they developing or getting deeper in certain capability areas that are important to the business, and also how are they really retaining talent, especially with their high performers, right? Key challenge at that level. As you start to scale up from that transition from your mid-level leaders to the senior leaders, obviously that aperture widens, right? Greater scope, less of a team focus, more of a functional focus, and also cross-functional focus. So you're starting to build that enterprise mindset, and how are they driving not only outcomes for their particular area or function or division, but how are they doing that more broadly across the organization? And then as they start to make, of course, that jump to the C-level, how are senior leaders really preparing the organization in terms of setting the right priorities, but also building the right capability that's not just needed for today, but also for the future? And then how are they building the robust succession plans and leadership frameworks that really tie that all together? So similar flavor as you go up and down in terms of building capability, but different focus areas, different apertures. And I'll go back to that cake versus cupcake analogy I mentioned before. So, you know, the challenge of when I was working with this particular senior leader was she's like, I sort of have two choices. Do I build a really beautiful cake that is going to wow everyone at the party, but takes a long time to build and it's hard to replicate? Or do I bake a bunch of cupcakes, right, that are easier to make, They're a bit more targeted to what people like, and there can be some more variety there. But they might be a little bit stale, and they're not very memorable. People don't ask me for the recipe at the end of the party. And so I thought it was a really interesting lens to think about. And so we kind of had a fun dialogue going back and forth a little bit about that. And what we sort of landed on was it's neither. It's more of a multi-layered cake where you've got a consistent structure that ties together your leadership development programs across the levels, right? So there's consistency there. But each layer of the cake, if you think about each layer being a level of leader, that flavor, that recipe needs to be a little bit different and more tailored to the needs of that specific audience, both from an engagement perspective, but also meeting the particular business needs that are appropriate at each level. So feel free to steal that if that resonates with you. We had sort of a fun dialogue. There was a spin-off on a number of other ideas and recipes. I won't go into that right now. And I am not a baker by any means, but it was a fun way to kind of think about addressing this particular challenge from that lens. So I mentioned unique needs. Okay, so I want to get a little bit more into that now. And talking about the unique needs within each level. So I'm going to show a distribution here on the screen. That's a typical breakdown when you think about the needs of your leaders within each level. And when I talk about level, I mean frontline, mid-level, executive, etc. Okay, so these are three pretty stable categories you can think about and reference within any given leadership level. That is, there's about 10% that are newer to the role, just stepping into that role within that level, right? And in that case, there are probably folks that are, again, new hires, or these are recent promotions. If it's a frontline leader level, these are first-time leaders. They're still developing the core skills that are needed from that perspective, and they may or may not have a lot of leadership training in the past. Then you got 60% bucket. That's the largest bucket in the donut here, right? Think about both of those as more of your seasoned contributors that are performing in place, right? They are steady capabilities, steady contributors, more seasoned, not new in the role, and they tend to have more tenure as well, right? So thinking about the needs that they would have in that particular bucket. And then roughly about 30% are probably in some sort of transition. So these might include your high potentials, folks that are exploring new roles, others that are starting to sort of think about, well, what is my next step in the organization? And what skills do I need to be able to build to make that type of transition successfully? Okay. So you have this framework that's sort of underpinning within each level that represents where people are at different places in the journey and also the different needs that they would have. And so feel free to put in chat too, if a particular audience here that maybe is one that you've been focusing on the most or is its highest priority in your organization. I think that might be good for us just to see how that's starting to pan out as well from that perspective. But it adds additional layer. So there's unique needs, but then there's also tied to these unique outcomes. I'm gonna go ahead and build this slide out in its entirety as well. So you think about folks that are new to role, what's most important for the organization for this particular group? And a lot of times it's speed to contribution to value. You want to create the right development experience that they can ramp up as quickly as possible and provide value in their roles. And that we're also providing clarity and support and quick wins from that perspective. For those folks that are more seasoned, performing in place, how do you keep the sustained performance results in place, but then choosing the right place to go deeper with those leaders to elevate capability in the right places? And then also retention and engagement becomes incredibly important at this level because they are performing in place. There are opportunities to continue to stretch this particular group, even if they don't have their eye on making a transition to the next level at this particular point. There's still places that they can grow and develop and be stretched, and that would help drive strong engagement from that group. So really important when you think about that population. Then of course, those folks and leaders that are in transition. So a lot of times the focus here is how close are they to being ready to make that jump to the next level? So for instance, your mid-level leaders, what's the population that you see as with the highest potential to make that jump to an executive role, and how ready are they? And what are the areas that they're not ready that you need to close gaps? So that's where assessments can really play an important role. We're going to talk more about that as well. but creating more self-awareness around what their strengths and capabilities areas are has a really important impact in that particular population. So I want you to think about these as a backdrop. And what we're going to do is I want to unpack 3 specific sort of scenarios and some organizational examples that go along with those that talk about these different needs at different levels. Okay. And the first I want to start out with is the challenge of those folks that are 10% that are new to their role, and specifically from a frontline or first-time frontline leader role. So think about that group for a second. Those are folks just stepping in. This is maybe their first leadership role they've had in their career. And there's some really important stretch areas or learning curves that surface at this level. Some of these are probably familiar to you as well. They're transitioning from more of their functional and technical skills to true leadership skills. They are having to get results through others versus doing themselves. They may be in the case of leading former peers, which is one of the biggest challenges too, making that types of transition. And it's not typically a quick hit with this audience. You're having to really build core capability. So it requires really focused development and attention around those core skills. So what do you do in that scenario? These are some best practice principles when we work with organizations, particularly with this level, this type of population that we are zeroed in on. I'm going to share an example too that brings some of this to life as well. A couple of these I'm really going to start with, which is building those core skills or what those essential skills are. So a lot of times it is things like communication, being able to coach, being able to effectively delegate and empower. Those are the skills that really haven't received as much attention, obviously, if they haven't been in a leadership role before, but they are critical in this space. So using that as really important anchors for any type of development program or assessments that would target those areas. The role of application too is obviously critical across, really important as they're trying on these new skills so that you're teaching them the fundamentals, but then you're also giving them the right application opportunities and coaching so they can pivot, adjust where needed. And then also the role of the manager, again, important across all, but really critical at this for leaders who are stepping into a first-time leader role. We've seen in our research, this is seen across a number of other studies, even outside of DDI, is the critical role that manager support plays in the success or failure of a frontline leader program and how often it's not in place, right? So that's sort of a dichotomous or contradictory set of findings, but it reinforces that it's something that's so critical and a lot of first-time leaders aren't getting it. So how are you making sure that's really baked in an intentional way as part of your program? The example I'm going to share is actually from a company, Hitachi Energy. Some of you may be familiar with them as well. We partnered with them recently around developing specifically a targeted program for first-time leaders, and they were zeroed in on a few specific core skills. They wanted to be able to drive collaboration, innovation, and engagement. And they were targeting about 750 plant supervisors in that population. They had a really strong framework that was a strong anchor for the program, which they called the 3 C's. So communication, coaching, and conflict. And that was a really strong roadmap that also was anchored in what was most critical for where the business was headed as well and created that relevance as well. Really interesting results and pretty impressive results from this program. I'm just going to highlight a couple of those, but one of them is that as a result of the program, turnover dropped by about 80% for salary employees and 25% for hourly employees. And that resulted in a savings of about $20 million over about 18 months following the launch. So really impressive bottom line impacts, and also 92% of the leaders that went through the program said that they were engaged in their jobs. So highlights not only the important focus at this level, but also the ROI that can really come alongside that's so important. I'm going to tease another example, which this is a customer partner that's going to be at our Better Leaders Summit in November. I'm going to share more details about that too at the end of the call as well. But this particular organization, State Farm, has a really impressive story around their frontline leader program that was just implemented this past year called Leading with Purpose. where they were able to put through a really large population of about 1,500 leaders in multiple cohorts across that first year. So I won't steal their thunder. You can definitely come to the summit and they are going to tell you more of the really juicy details on that front, but really impressive story on how you build capability for this particular audience. All right, I'm going to transition us to sort of the next lens here, which is, what about those leaders that fell in the biggest bucket? You know, those 60% that are performing in place, where you want to make sure you're sustaining performance, deepening capability in the right places, and also driving the right level of engagement as well. And wanted to share an example, this time more from the mid-level side of the fence. So again, some of the typical challenges here is a program can't feel too basic. So these leaders, obviously at this level, especially at the mid-level, typically the core is built, and now it's about elevating those skills. So how do you do that in a way that is going to weave in the right level of stretch, but also tie back to the specific business context that's so important at this particular level? And that's not easy to do from that perspective. This is also where assessment can start to be a really powerful tool, whether that's objective assessment that also includes personality as well. Because a lot of times it's the personality piece that can sometimes get in the way, even for seasoned leaders, where they've got the core capability muscles are built, but there's aspects about their personality that can help or hurt them in those areas. And so creating that self-awareness through assessment is a really critical piece of the puzzle there. As a quick plug, if you want to learn more about the different types of assessments and how and where to use those, from objective assessments, simulations to 360s, kind of the full spectrum, you'll see in your console that we are doing a webinar on that particular topic, and that's on October 29th. So we'd love for you to join us if you want to get deeper around that particular topic as well. But what do you do in this particular area? Specifically, as performing in place, mid-level, how do you address? We talked about a couple of these, but one is how do you level up and make sure your design is the right mix of programmatic elements, so some more classroom experiences, but also how are you weaving in experiential elements through different types of insight assessments, maybe objective assessments, and also learning through peers. We found that peer coaching, peer connection is such a huge enabler in this particular space, as well as leveraging assessment to build that self-awareness. This becomes critical at this level. So how you want to intentionally embed that in the program, whether that's an assessment up front, in the middle, or more at the end, can be a really powerful tool in that mix. From a customer perspective, this is another particular example we wanted to highlight. This is a company called Avnet. They're a leading global technology solutions provider, sort of across all stages of the product lifecycle. They've got about 15,000 employees globally, and about 4,000 of those are in Asia specifically. And what's really impressive is they were specifically focused on building programs that accelerated leaders across multiple levels. But what I'm going to do is spotlight the program that they did specifically at the mid-level. And this was a program that they leveraged specifically DDI's content that was geared towards the mid-level from our mid-level series of programmatic content, but also digital learning and micro courses. Where they were really zeroing in on was key capability areas that they have noticed that were kind of really stretch areas for this particular population. And that was translating strategy into results. How do they communicate that with their teams? How they build broader networks and partnerships, not just within their own teams and functions, but outside. And then how do they really master decisions and making quick, informed decisions that don't slow down the speed to execution? So really compelling program that was a mix of modalities from that perspective, and also woven not only content, but different types of insights, assessments as well along the way. They also certified around 47 in-house facilitators, so to be able to deliver the content. So it was a mix of DDI facilitators, but also a team of global facilitators within their organization. And they were able to put together, about 15 to 20 cohorts, 15 to 20 leaders in about 8 cohorts throughout that year. So a really impressive way of getting very focused at that level, and then weaving in some of the particular principles that you see here that are really critical for the mid-level. Quest Diagnostics, which again is another customer partner of ours, they will also be at our Leadership Summit. They've had really impressive results with both the frontline program, but also their mid-level program as well. And some of the elements were shared with what AvNet included, but also some unique aspects there as well. They have a really compelling story about that they'll be sharing at this year's summit also. The last example that I'm going to share is more at the senior level. So again, thinking about specifically those emerging executives, those more director level or mid-level, they're about to make the jump or are in transition to a more senior level role. And what's different about the executive level, specifically for emerging executives? The pressure to hit the ground running obviously is even greater. Someone raised this point in chat about the limited time for development. This is even more pronounced at this level, obviously. And typically there's not a lot of support. A lot of new executives are really just sort of thrown into the deep end with not a lot of onboarding or support or self-insight or coaching. And that can be a real miss in terms of setting them up for success. And the cost is really high obviously for individuals that are in those roles. So what do you do and what do you target at this level? Again, assessment plays a really critical role here in terms of assessing their readiness or proximity to readiness through a simulation approach. So not just where are their strengths and gaps from their current role, but how do they stack up against the challenges in that future executive role? And so being able to have a lens that really assessment that brings those insights to bear and can fuel a really strong development plan has been such a huge lever in those programs. Obviously, this is where coaching and one-on-one coaching can be a really strong supplement to a more programmatic experience. So they have that one-on-one connection with the coach, but they're also learning through their peers and in broader groups. And I'm going to share this particular example as well as sort of spotlighted because it actually won the Brandon Hall Group Award just recently, which is a really prestigious honor in the L&D community, which you all are probably aware of as well. But this is Atkins Realis. They're a global powerhouse in engineering and nuclear services. They had come off of a year of a lot of pretty significant transformation, and they needed to prepare their executives to be able to help drive change, but also drive that transformation within their role. So it was a really immersive executive leadership experience that they rolled out globally to their population of leaders. And it included both a 360 assessment component on the front end for initial insight. There was a really robust business simulation that was also part of the process. And they also did a really nice job of baking in senior leader involvement as well. So as a result, there were about 49% of participants have been promoted that were part of the program. And their lateral moves also increased by 30%. They also saw some uptick in engagement and diversity across the senior leadership pipeline as well. So really impressive results that, again, building on the principles that you see here that are so critical at that level. We've got a really compelling story from the Federal Reserve Bank as well that they will also be at the Leadership Summit. So make sure that you attend and check out that session too as well. Similar journey, but really aligned to the business context that was most important for their leaders and the strategy for the Federal Reserve. So those are some quick examples to bring some of those principles to life. But the point really wanted to make sure that we're bringing home with you all is it's a zoom in, zoom out moment here a little bit, right? You want to make sure that you're zooming out to think about what's the most important broader structure to have in place so that you're training and developing the right skills across your entire leadership pipeline. And you're creating the right pools of individuals to be able to make those transitions. But then also you're providing the right level of specificity within level based on the unique needs of that audience so that you're able to grow, but also engage folks that are maybe newer to the role, that have been more seasoned in the role, but still have stretch areas, and those that are getting ready to transition. So having a really sort of strong, delicious cake, right? It's gonna wow for folks at a party, but you've got to make sure that each level of or layer of that cake is the recipe is in sync with what the needs are for that audience at that particular level, right? So a way to kind of bring it in from that front. I'll end our session here today, and I want to make sure we leave just a couple minutes for some questions as well. But you heard me mention the Better Leaders Summit in November that will be in Scottsdale, Arizona. And some of the examples I mentioned today, we will have representatives from those organizations who are leading the front in these particular areas, specifically State Farm, Quest Diagnostics, and Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. They will be there, and they'll be telling their really compelling stories on how they've been driving these types of programs across levels within their organization. So a chance to really hear their story straight from their perspective as well, and be able to take lessons learned back to your own organization. So we would love to see you at the summit, and I'm sure they'd love to have you as well in their sessions. All right, 30 minutes goes very, very fast, doesn't it? So I'm gonna pause here for just maybe a question or two as we round out today's session. I think, Nikki, you were keeping track of maybe a couple that might have come through as we were making our way through the discussion.
Yep, there's a lot of good energy and interest around, especially the in transition audience. And so just to pull together a couple of questions that came in, can you share a little bit of your perspective around how do you manage that transition, especially from their mindset, like really getting them ready to understand the new role that's in front of them? So there was a question around role clarity, expectations, and then the mentality of the leaders themselves.
Yeah, I think it's on a couple of fronts. So I think it's a great question to raise. You know, one is about really that you're painting the right picture for the scope and the expectations of what's required at that next level, right? So, and what's going to be what's going to feel the most different, where the biggest shifts or learning curves going to be. I think that can be a really compelling conversation to have with either the person and their manager or future manager, right? But really to paint that picture. As I mentioned, simulations can be a really powerful tool as well, because they get to just not hear about the stretch areas, but they get to experience it in a safe environment and then get objective feedback around where do they have skills that are really stacking up to those next level expectations, and where are some areas that might have some gaps that they need to close. So that can also be really compelling part of that as well. I think from the mindset too is like making sure you're real with them about what those next step looks like, but how you're also building confidence and you're being clear about the level of support that they're going to have as well. And again, that's the support, especially up in senior levels. We see that fall down in a lot of organizations, not because the intent isn't there, but it's just not, the right level of spotlight is not put there. That really can be a make or break, especially at executive level. So being clear that this is a shift, we expect it to be, and there's outlets of support that are going to help you make those transitions, and here's what they are. That can be a really compelling way to, again, kind of hit the need on multiple fronts. Great question. Nikki, did we have one more here that we wanted to hit on?
There was one, share your perspectives around flattening of organizations. There was a comment, I know you said, the pyramid is an example, but maybe wanted to hear your perspectives on how organizations are also dealing with technical experts and technical roles, and also as organizations choose to flatten some layers.
Yeah, obviously seeing that a lot too in organizations where that pyramid may be condensing a little bit, right? But the concept of transition is still there. So even if it's not maybe transitioning to a next level role in terms of a formal leadership jump, the principle still applies. You think about lateral moves as well. So that you're setting the right expectations, also being clear about, well, what's the capability set that is relevant now? And then how would that shift, whether it's a move up or a move across, for example. And so the principles still apply. The context, though, is obviously just a little bit different. But I think it raises still the importance of using objective data, providing the right level of support, just being really clear about what the context is and where, especially if it's seasoned individuals who are maybe making a lateral move, what capability do they need to make sure they're carrying over, and where do they need to get deeper? That can be a really compelling way to also convey, again, how the landscape is changing, but then also how they need to adapt and pivot from that perspective. Great questions. I wish we had time for more here as well. I see some good questions in the chat as well. So our team will be following up with you on that front as well. And we can share, obviously, the deck from today's discussions. But hopefully this was really helpful for you all. It's a really fascinating topic, I think, to dive into, and it has lots of potential twists and turns, right, to have to navigate, which that's what makes our jobs a lot of fun in the leadership space. So thank you for your time today. We would, again, love to see you at our Better Leaders Summit. So feel free to reach out to us and we can get you aligned to that if that's of interest. And please join us for our next webinar. That'll be on October 29th. And we'll be diving more into the different types of assessments for what, really how to navigate that really interesting space. So please join us. And thanks for the time today.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to everyone joining today. You will receive a link to watch this on demand later this afternoon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.